Imagine young Emma Wild, alone in the vast expanses of the Wild West, fighting for her plantation, when her life suddenly turns into a nightmare under the onslaught of wild boars and human greed. Behind the beasts lurks the ruthless Silas Blackwood, whose dirty hands try to snatch the last thing she has left, causing furious indignation. But no one expected fate to send an unexpected guardian angel, the mysterious Cowboy Jack Turner, whose two shots not only saved Emma from certain death but also turned the tide of the entire struggle. Get ready for a story where despair gives way to triumph, and justice paves its way through the darkest times. Subscribe, like, and watch until the end, because the denouement of this drama is truly shocking, teaching wisdom comparable to the modern world. The scorching Arizona sun of 1880 spared no one, but for Emma Wild, every dawn was a reminder of her harsh existence. In her early 20s, with fiery red hair perpetually escaping from beneath her dusty bandana, and eyes the color of a summer sky, in which an ancient sadness seemed to be frozen, she carried on her fragile shoulders the burden of caring for a small but valuable tobacco plantation, inherited from her recently deceased father. This was not just land, it was her only legacy, her anchor in the merciless world of the Wild West, and her motivation was simple and harsh: to preserve this place at all costs. Young but hardened by hardship, Emma rose before dawn every day, her slender but strong hands accustomed to labor. She plowed, planted, watered, her figure, though graceful, filled with astonishing resilience. Every tobacco leaf was like a child to her, which she cared for with maternal tenderness. Her plantation was located on the edge of vast, wild lands known as fang swamps, which made her work even more dangerous. She lived in an old, dilapidated shack, her only protectors a loyal but aging dog named Cole, and her father's Winchester, which she handled as well as any man. There was no place for weakness or despair in her life, only stubborn, almost fanatical determination to survive. One particularly sweltering afternoon, when the air shimmered over the hot ground, Emma, bent over a young bush, noticed something unusual. The soil at the western border of the plantation, where the wild thickets began, was churned up. These were not just animal tracks, they were deep, wide furrows, scored with incredible force. Emma immediately tensed. Her heart, accustomed to the dangers of the desert, beat more anxiously. Colt, dozing at her feet, raised his head, his ears perked, and a low, warning growl escaped his chest. "Wild pigs," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Wild boars were a real scourge for any farmer. These huge, aggressive beasts, with sharp tusks and a furious temper, could destroy an entire harvest in a matter of hours, leaving only devastation in their wake. And, what was worse, they were dangerous to humans. Her father always told stories of how these creatures attacked lone travelers, turning them into a bloody mess. Emma hastily grabbed her Winchester, which was always at hand, and, crouching, moved towards the western border, beyond which the wild thicket stretched. Her eyes carefully scanned every bush, every tree. Colt, pressed against her legs, whimpered softly, his fur standing on end. This was not just fear for the harvest, it was a terror that gripped Emma, a threat to her only source of sustenance, her future, her life. Suddenly, a huge, brown body burst from the dense mesquite thickets. It was a wild boar, enormous, with sharp, curved tusks that gleamed in the sun. It was incredibly fast, and its small, bloodshot eyes were full of furious rage. Behind it, as if on command, two more burst out, then three more, a whole pack of wild boars, their grunts and heavy breathing tearing through the silence. They were hungry, and they were aggressive. Emma froze, her finger poised on the trigger. She aimed, but her hands trembled. 7, possibly 8 huge, fierce beasts, moving directly towards her. Her old Winchester, though reliable, couldn't handle them all, especially since she didn't want to waste valuable ammunition if there was a chance to scare them away. "Get out! Get away!" Emma shouted, trying to scare them off, but the boar seemed only to grow angrier. They picked up speed, their heavy bodies shaking the ground. In their eyes was not just hungry rage, but a vicious, predatory determination. Emma turned and fled. Her light dress flapped in the wind, and her legs, though trained, felt like jelly. Colt ran beside her, his bark desperate. She heard their grunts and the thud of hooves behind her, felt their hot breath. It was terror, pure and unadulterated. Fear for her life, for her home, for her future. She ran with all her might, her lungs burning, and tears in her eyes. She knew she couldn't run forever, that sooner or later, They would catch her. And then it would all be over. Emma's lungs burned, each breath an agonizing torment, but she kept running, her heart pounding in her chest like a wild bird caught in a trap. Cold, her old but desperately loyal dog, ran beside her. His horse barked, the only sound drowning out the thud of hooves and the vicious grunts of the wild boars that chased her heels. The ground beneath Emma's feet was uneven, full of bumps and hidden mesquite roots, every step threatening a fall. She felt branches whipping her face, dust rising around her, choking her nose and mouth. The huge, dark silhouettes of the boars were close now. She could almost feel their hot breath, the sharp stench of their muddy fur. Despair washed over her in waves, threatening to consume her completely. Tears welled in her eyes, but she dared not wipe them away, so as not to lose sight of the saving path. As it seemed to her, she knew her Winchester was useless against such a horror, and valuable ammunition needed to be conserved. The knife she wore on her belt was only symbolic comfort. Her only hope was to reach a small gorge where, she remembered, there was a narrow passage, too tight for large animals. That her strength was fading with every meter. Her legs became disobedient, and at some point, tripping over a protruding root, she fell to her knees. "It's over," flashed through her mind. The boars were very close now, their furious grunts deafening, and one of them, the largest, with bloody tusks, had already raised its head for a strike. Suddenly, through the panicked haze, Emma heard a deafening gunshot. The sound was powerful, unlike the pop of her Winchester. The huge boar, about to attack her, shuddered. Its body twitched unnaturally, and it crashed to the ground with a loud squeal, kicking up clouds of dust. A moment later, a second shot rang out, and another boar, hesitating for a second, met the same fate as its companion. The others, startled by the sudden attack, froze, their instincts dictating caution. Emma, still on her knees, slowly turned her head. From behind the dense thickets she had so hastily tried to overcome, a rider appeared. It was a man. He sat on a tall, powerful horse, his wide-brimmed hat shielding his face from the sun, but Emma managed to notice his stately figure and confident posture. His Colt smoked in his hand, and he held it as if born with it. The cowboy was dressed in a worn leather vest, a faded blue shirt, and sturdy trousers, his boots showing signs of a long journey. On his face, if any emotions were readable, it was only calm concentration. The wild boars, sensing a new threat, did not tempt fate. With loud, prolonged grunts, they turned and plunged back into the thickets, their massive bodies disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. The silence that followed their flight seemed deafening. The man dismounted, his movements slow and fluid, exuding confidence and strength. He walked towards Emma, his gaze direct and scrutinizing. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and even, without a hint of panic or haste. There was nothing in his tone but calm concern. Emma tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. She felt her whole body trembling, her blood pounding in her temples. I think so," she whispered, her voice hoarse. From her father, she had adopted a strict rule, never show weakness. But now, after the horror she had endured, it was hard for her to hold back. She looked up at him, and in her gaze was deep gratitude mixed with a slight shock at such unexpected salvation. The cowboy extended his hand to her. His palm was large, calloused, and strong. "My name is Jack Turner," he introduced himself. "Your boars could have caused real havoc here, and you could have been trampled." Emma took his hand, and his touch was unexpectedly warm and comforting. He helped her up, and for a moment she felt protected in his presence. Colt, who had been standing at a safe distance, approached Jack, sniffed him distrustfully, but then, to Emma's surprise, wagged his tail. "Emma Wilde," she said, "thank you. You saved my life." Jack Turner merely nodded. "You've wandered too far from home, Miss Wilde. These are dangerous lands." He surveyed the surroundings, his eyes wary. "You need to be careful. Now, let me take you home." And at that moment, looking at Jack, at his calm but determined face, Emma felt something new stirring in her soul. After the horror she had endured, after the fear for her life and future, a thin but bright spark of hope appeared. She did not yet know who this man was or why he was here, but his appearance was a miracle that gave her a second chance. Jack Turner, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, with a face weathered by prairie winds and shrewd brown eyes that seemed to see through any lie, sat in the saddle with the effortless grace that comes only from years spent amidst the vast expanses of the Wild West. His motivation was simple and rooted in a deep sense of justice. He roamed these lands, earning a living by herding cattle and taking odd jobs, but always remained one who could not pass by someone else's misfortune. He had lost his family, far worse from Missouri, as a bow during a bandit raid, and ever since, his life had been dedicated to finding his place in a world where law was fragile and human life was cheat. He was a man of few words, but his actions always conveyed unwavering determination. Emma, with trembling hands, pointed him towards her plantation. They moved slowly, Jack leading his horse by the bridle, giving Emma time to catch her breath. Colt, having recovered from the shock, ran ahead, occasionally looking back as if making sure his mistress was safe. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in fiery hues, when in the distance, Emma's small, humble shack appeared, surrounded by green rows of tobacco plants. This sight, usually bringing her peace, now evoked mixed feelings. On one hand, she was home, safe. On the other hand, the horror of the recent attack still clutched her heart. Jack, noticing Emma's state, didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply offered her a canteen of water. "Drink, Miss Wilde. You need it." Emma nodded gratefully, sipping from the canteen. The cool water brought her some relief, and she felt her trembling subside a little. Upon arriving at the plantation, Jack immediately dismounted. His gaze quickly assessed the condition of the land. The wild boar tracks scattered haphazardly around the perimeter. "They did a thorough job here, Miss Wilde," he said, his voice grave. "If I hadn't arrived—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Emma understood what he meant. Her heart tightened with fear again, but not the same panic as a few moments ago. Now, fear had been replaced by bitter anger at the merciless world that had so unfairly descended upon her fragile existence. "This is all I have, Mr. Turner," Emma said, her voice filled with despair. "My father left me this land. I cannot lose it." She took a step forward, her eyes filled with determination. "I won't give up." Her words were not just a declaration, but a vow, given to herself and her father's memory. Jack nodded, his eyes meeting hers. In them, he saw not just fear, but an unyielding spirit that struck him. He, who was accustomed to seeing women of the Wild West either submissive or broken, saw something different in Emma, a will to live that was akin to his own. "I see," he replied, "but you can't handle this alone. These creatures will return, and with them other troubles." He pointed to the horizon. Such places attract more than just boars. Jack's motivation to help Emma was complex, but genuine. He saw in her echoes of his own struggles. Her stubbornness reminded him of his mother's resilience. He couldn't just leave her alone, knowing the danger that surrounded her. It was his inner conviction, his personal code of honor. The next morning, with the first rays of sun, Jack was already inspecting the perimeter of the plantation. He wasn't just a cowboy, he was a man who knew a thing or two about survival. He pointed out weaknesses in her fencing, offered ideas for creating traps and temporary barriers that could deter wild animals. His actions were quick and decisive, showing a practical mind and years of experience. Emma, initially wary of his advice, soon realized that he spoke sense and began to listen. "We need to build a strong fence," Jack said, surveying the nearest grove where wood could be taken. "For now, we can make temporary barbed wire fences. It's not a perfect solution, but it'll buy you time." He handed Emma an axe. "Do you know how to handle this?" Emma nodded. "Learned it from my father." He said, "A woman in the West has to know everything." She took the axe, and despite her tiredness, there was confidence in her movements. All day they worked side by side. Emma chopped down small trees, Jack cleared them of branches and set them as posts for the future fence. A silent understanding, based on a common goal, grew between them. Colt ran around, occasionally helping to drag small branches. Evening came as they, exhausted but pleased with the result, sat by the campfire. Temporary fences now stood around the plantation, and in several places, Jack had set simple but effective traps. Looking at the fruits of their labor, Emma felt a surge of triumph. It was a small victory, but it was important. She felt not like a broken victim, but a strong woman fighting for her life and her legacy. For the first time in a long time, she felt she was not alone in this fight. Jack's presence, his calm strength, his willingness to help, all of it gave her hope. She knew there were still many difficulties ahead, but now she was ready to face them. The new life on the plantation, though filled with hard work, brought Emma an unprecedented sense of confidence. The temporary fences hastily erected around the tobacco fields and the ingenious trap set by Jack provided a respite from the wild boars. Mornings began with the invigorating aroma of freshly brewed coffee and campfire smoke, over which Jack skillfully prepared breakfast, while Emma, after a quick morning round, checked on the seedlings, her movements precise and caring. Days stretched into a tense but productive rhythm. Jack didn't just help, he taught how to properly handle wood, how to better fortify the soil, how to read animal tracks. Emma, initially uncertain, quickly caught on, her natural aim and stubbornness making her an able student. Colt, their faithful guardian, no longer looked at Jack with suspicion now he slept at his feet, trusting him as much as he trusted Emma. Their joint work was not just a struggle for survival, but a slow, almost imperceptible process of healing. Jack, observing Emma's stubbornness, her unyielding will, found echoes of long-forgotten hope within himself. Emma, in turn, saw in Jack's quiet strength something she had desperately missed after her father's death, a reliable anchor. They felt that their struggle was not in vain, that in every stake driven, in every saved tobacco plant, in every moment spent in safety, there was a profound meaning. It was an inspiration that gave them strength to move forward, despite all hardships. However, peace in the Wild West was always as fragile as a dry leaf. On one particularly windy day, when dust obscured the horizon and the sky clouded over, foreshadowing a storm, Jack, riding around the perimeter, discovered something disturbing. Several miles south of the plantation, on lands bordering Emma's property, new markers had appeared. These were not just boundary posts, but large, freshly cut stakes with the initials S.B. burned into them. And these stakes stood too close to Emma's plantation, much closer than the old maps allowed. Jack, frowning, dismounted and carefully examined one of the stakes. The tracks around where fresh hoof prints indicated several riders. He immediately returned to the plantation, his face grim. "Trouble, Emma," he said, his voice low. "Someone's trying to take your land, and he's not being gentle about it." Emma, hearing this, felt a sharp pang of fear pierce her heart, which quickly turned into furious anger. After everything she had been through, after losing her father, after fighting off wild boars, now someone was trying to take her last possession. "Who?" she demanded, her voice trembling with indignation. "Who dared?" Jack shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I've seen similar markings before. It's the handiwork of Silas Blackwood, a local landowner, a crook dealer who stops at nothing to expand his holdings. They say he amassed a fortune through deceit and intimidation of small farmers. Silas Blackwood's motivation was simple and repulsive: limitless greed. He believed that might was right, and that any land he could seize was rightfully his. His reputation was grim. Those who resisted often lost not only their land but their lives." Emma clenched her teeth. She was painfully familiar with such a feeling of powerlessness in the face of cruelty. "My father said Blackwood was a plague of the Wild West. He always wanted our land." She looked at her tobacco fields, at every plant she had planted with such love. "I won't give it up. Not for anything." Her determination was absolute, her anger now fire burning in her eyes. Jack nodded. "I know, and I'll help you, but we need to be careful. Blackwood doesn't act alone. He has men, and they won't ask questions." The next day they headed to Prescott. The town, usually nosy and dusty, now seemed alien and hostile to Emma. She felt eyes on her, full of curiosity and judgment. They went straight to the land registrar's office. Henry Fitzgerald, a fat, sweaty man with perpetually trembling hands, who always seemed frightened. "Mr. Fitzgerald," Jack began, placing an old map of Emma's plantation on the table. "Someone is trying to illegally seize Miss Wild's land." Putting up their markers, Fitzgerald, seeing the map and the markers, turned pale. His hands trembled even more. "Silas Blackwood," he stammered, his voice barely audible. I can't do anything. He's too powerful. By law, this land belongs to me," Emma said angrily, slamming her fist on the table. "My father owned it. I have all the documents." Fitzgerald looked at her with pity. "Documents? That's good, Miss Wild. But Blackwood, he has other documents. People who will make you give up. I can't go against him. My life." He didn't finish, just waved his hand. His motivation was fear. He knew what Blackwood was capable of and didn't want to become his next victim. Emma felt a pang of pain pierce her heart. Injustice was not just a word, it was a reality. cruel and ruthless. The law that was supposed to protect her turned out to be powerless against greed and fear. She looked at Jack, and in his eyes, she saw the same understanding. This was not just a battle with wild boars, it was a battle with the system itself, with people who considered themselves above the law. After the fruitless visit to Henry Fitzgerald, a heavy, oppressive silence fell over the plantation. The registrar's words echoed in Emma's ears: Blackwood has other documents. People who will make you give up. This phrase, like a whip's crack, severed the last thread of hope for a legal solution. Emma sat on the porch, her hands tightly clenched, her gaze fixed on the horizon where twilight was already gathering. She felt despair weighing down on her. Everything she had worked so hard to build, everything her father had left her, now hung by a thread. The injustice of this world seemed insurmountable. Jack Turner, usually calm and composed, was also grim. He stood by his horse, Rambo, stroking her mane, his gaze thoughtful. He had seen many such situations in the Wild West, where greed and power triumphed over law and justice. His own history was proof of that. But he couldn't just leave Emma. He felt a deep connection to this stubborn, brave woman, and her fight had become his fight. He understood that Fitzgerald's words were not an empty threat, but a warning. Blackwood would stop at nothing. The next day, barely had the sun appeared over the horizon, when 3 riders approached the plantation. These were Silas Blackwood's thugs, whom Jack had seen before. Dirty, armed men with cold, empty eyes. The largest of them, a burly man named Butch, with a thick scar crossing his left eyebrow, rode in front. His gaze was insolent and arrogant. "Well, girl," Butch rasped, dismounting and heading straight for Emma, who stood on the porch with her Winchester in her hands. "Mr. Blackwood says this land is his now. Pack your belongings and get out quietly. And that cowboy of yours, he better leave too. Otherwise, things will get ugly." His accomplices, two silent and sullen types, remained in their saddles, their hands resting on the handles of their revolvers. Anger flared in Emma again, a hot fire burning within her. "This is my land. My father left it to me. And I'm not going anywhere," she cried, her voice, though trembling, full of determination. She raised her Winchester, aiming at Butch's chest. Butch merely sneered, his eyes full of contempt. "Stupid girl. Think a gun will save you." He took a step forward, his hand reaching for hers. "We can do this the hard way, or the very hard way. You choose." Jack, who had been standing aside all this time, observing the scene, slowly stepped forward. His hand, like lightning, drew his Colt from its holster. "Leave her alone, Butch," he said, his voice low and threatening. "This land belongs to her. And you know I'm not lying." Butch spun sharply towards Jack, his face contorted with anger. "Turner, long time no see, old friend. What? Found yourself a new mistress? Or just decided to play hero?" He spat on the ground. "Get out of here before I remember old grudges." Butch's motivation was not only to carry out Blackwood's orders, but also a personal animosity towards Jack, with whom he apparently had a long-standing score. "You have 3 minutes to get off this land." Jack ignored his words, his eyes cold as steel. "Otherwise, I'll shoot." Butch laughed, but his laughter no longer held its former confidence. He knew that Jack Turner didn't make idle threats. He had seen how quickly and accurately Jack shot. He glanced at his accomplices, then back at Jack. A flicker of hesitation, a struggle between greed and fear, crossed his eyes. "All right, Turner," he snarled through clenched teeth. "We'll leave. But this isn't over, Mr. Blackwood doesn't like to be crossed. He'll be back. And then you'll regret this." Butch and his men turned and hastily rode off, kicking up clouds of dust. Emma lowered her Winchester, her hands trembling. She looked at Jack, and in her eyes was admiration. He didn't just save her from the boars, he protected her from people who were far more dangerous. He stood between her and injustice, like an unbreakable wall. At that moment, she realized that her hope for justice, her faith in a better future, was now linked to him. In his actions there was not only strength, but a deep, unwavering belief in the righteousness of their cause. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered, her voice full of sincere gratitude. You're my protector." Jack merely nodded. "We're together, Emma, and we won't give up." He looked at the horizon, where the silhouettes of Blackwood's thugs had disappeared. "But this is just the beginning. We need to prepare for the real battle." Jack's words, "we need to prepare for the real battle," echoed in Emma's mind, filling her with a mixture of admiration for his resolve and a new, conscious anger towards Silas Blackwood, who dared to encroach on her home. From that day, The plantation transformed into a fortress, and their days into a continuous string of preparations. Mornings began even before dawn. Jack taught Emma to shoot her Colt with lightning speed, practicing every gesture, every movement. Her slender fingers grew accustomed to the cold metal of the grip, and her eyes learned to instantly focus on the target. He showed her how to properly take a position, how to use cover, how to read signs on the ground. Emma, initially uncertain, quickly caught on, her natural marksmanship and stubbornness making her an incapable student. Colt, her faithful dog, was always by her side, his keen hearing and scent invaluable for early warning. Alongside the training, they fortified the plantation. Days were spent building a tall, sturdy fence from thick logs gathered from the nearby forest. The work was exhausting. Emma chopped down trees, her hands calloused, and her back aching from fatigue. Jack, with his incredible strength, drove stakes into the ground, his muscles straining under his faded shirt. They dug shallow trenches around the perimeter, camouflaging them with dry branches, and set up watch posts from which they could observe the approaches to the plantation. Every tree, every stone around took on tactical significance. In this continuous struggle for survival, Emma felt her body grow stronger and her spirit more unyielding. She was no longer the frightened girl fleeing from boars. She was transforming into a warrior, ready to fight for her land. Emma's motivation was crystal clear: to protect the last thing she had left and to avenge the encroachment on her freedom. Jack, on the other hand, was driven not only by his innate sense of justice, but also by a growing attachment to Emma. He saw her resilience, her pure soul, and understood that she deserved protection. He had experienced too many losses in his past to allow this to happen again. He felt that his destiny was now inextricably linked with this plantation and this woman. Once, when the sun had almost disappeared behind the horizon, painting the sky in scarlet and orange tones, Jack, standing at the lookout post, noticed clouds of dust in the distance. Several riders were moving towards the plantation. He immediately signaled Emma. She, grabbing her Winchester, took up a position behind the sandbags they had thoughtfully piled by the cabin. Her heart pounded, but she felt not panic, but a cold, steel determination. Colt growled, ready for a fight. The riders stopped at the boundary of the property, not daring to approach the clearly fortified plantation. These were the same Blackwood thugs, led by Butch. They silently surveyed the new fortifications, their faces showing surprise and confusion. Butch, spitting, pulled something from his belt, threw it to the ground, and they hastily galloped back into the dusty distance. Emma and Jack cautiously approached the spot where something had been thrown. It was a small pouch. Untying it, Jack emptied the contents into his palm. Inside lay dry, withered tobacco leaves, carefully tied with a black ribbon, and a note pinned to them. Your harvest will rot while you high, wild. Blackwood doesn't wait. This was not just a threat, it was a subtle, cruel reminder that Blackwood knew their weaknesses and was ready to exploit them. Emma clutched the dried leaves, her hands trembling with helpless anger and burning pain. The harvest was her life, her only income. The scent of withered tobacco leaves, which usually gave her a sense of satisfaction, now recalled an impending disaster. This attack was not direct, but deeply personal. She understood that Blackwood wouldn't just shoot, he would slowly choke her, depriving her of her livelihood until she broke. Tears again gleamed in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear, but of a deep, piercing sorrow and a rage that she felt like a burning coal in her chest. He knows where to hit, it hurts, Jack said quietly, his voice full of compassion. He placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble. But we won't give up, Emma. We'll find a way. In his words was an unwavering hope that, despite the pain, still burned in their hearts, forcing them to seek a way out of a seemingly hopeless situation. Night fell on the plantation, but there was no sleep. Blackwood's note with the withered tobacco leaves was the last straw, igniting in Emma's soul not just anger, but a cold, searing determination. She sat by the campfire, watching the glowing embers, while Jack cleaned his Colt, his movements polished and calm. Colt, sensing the tension, whimpered anxiously at Emma's feet. In her eyes there was no trace of former naivety, only a steel will to win. He wants us to surrender, Emma said quietly, her voice firm, without a hint of doubt. He wants the harvest to rot. That won't happen. She raised her head, her gaze meeting Jack's. We will gather the harvest, every last leaf, and then we'll find a way to stop Blackwood. Jack nodded, his gaze full of hope, but also caution. He won't let us do it easily, Emma. His men will be everywhere, It will be dangerous. He understood that the struggle had now entered a new phase, where every step could cost them their lives. Then we'll be careful, Emma replied. We have no choice, Jack. If we lose the harvest, we lose everything. Emma's motivation was now not only to protect her legacy, but also to prove that she would not break under pressure. Their plan was risky, but the only possible one. They needed to harvest the tobacco before either time or Blackwood's men destroy it, and then, with the money from the sale, find a way to legally oppose him. Jack suggested contacting an old friend, a former ranger turned lawyer, in a small town on the other side of the Valley of Tears. This meant a long and dangerous journey that Emma would have to make alone with part of the harvest, while Jack remained to defend the plantation. The next few days were filled with frantic work. Emma and Jack toiled tirelessly, gathering the ripe tobacco leaves. The sun beat down relentlessly, dust choked their throats, but they did not stop. Every leaf collected was a step towards their goal. They worked under constant tension, knowing that Blackwood's men could appear at any moment. Colt patrolled the perimeter, his bark a warning signal. One night he barked, and Jack, grabbing his rifle, spent several anxious hours at the lookout post, watching shadows in the distance that seemed to move too purposefully. But it was only a trick of imagination, caused by fatigue. When most of the harvest was gathered and dry, Emma began to prepare for the journey. Jack gave her his best horse, an old but reliable mare named Melody, and packed supplies for her. He taught her how to disguise her tracks, how to avoid dangerous places, how to behave in an unfamiliar town. His concern was obvious, but he knew Emma would manage. Be careful, Emma, Jack said as she mounted, her face serious. If something goes wrong. Emma looked at him, and a shadow of sadness crossed her eyes. The parting was difficult, but she knew she had to do it. I'll manage, Jack. Guard the plantation. She set off at dawn, her silhouette dissolving in the pre-dawn mist. The path was long, stony, and dangerous. Emma rode alone, her Winchester across her lap, and her heart full of anxiety. She avoided main roads, preferring little-known trails. But the dangers of the Wild West were not limited to people. Once, riding through a small, overgrown canyon, Melody suddenly stumbled, and Emma felt the ground give way beneath her. The horse neighed, and the next moment Emma was tumbling down a steep slope, clutching her tobacco bags tightly. She hit the rocks, felt a sharp pain in her arm, and lost consciousness for a few moments. Waking up, she found herself lying at the bottom of a small ravine. Melody stood nearby, her leg injured, and the tobacco bags scattered in different directions. The sun was already setting, and shadows were gathering over the canyon. Despair again rose in her throat, but Emma quickly composed herself. Her arm, it seemed, was broken. The tobacco, her only chance, was scattered. She was wounded, and alone in this deserted place. It was a test that seemed to bring her to her knees. But deep inside her, despite the pain and fear, a spark of hope glowed. She could not give up. Not now. She had to collect the harvest and reach town. For her father. For Jack. For herself. Pain throbbed in Emma's broken arm, every attempt to move sending a sharp spasm through her. Around her, at the bottom of the ravine, lay scattered bags of tobacco, her only hope for the future. The sun had almost set, and ominous shadows gathered over the canyon, foreshadowing a cold, dangerous night. Despair, like a predator, stalked the edge of her consciousness, but Emma, gritting her teeth, clung to the last ember of hope that burned in her heart. She could not afford to give up, not after all that she and Jack had been through. Not now. Gathering all her strength, she slowly, agonizingly crawled towards Melody, who neighed pitifully, trying to stand on her injured leg. Emma examined the horse. The wound was deep, but fortunately, not fatal. Melody could not go fast, but she could still move. Then Emma began to collect the tobacco. Every leaf, every bundle was precious. Her left arm hung limply, but with her right, overcoming the pain, she gathered the scattered precious leaves, carefully folding them into the enamelled bags. It was a painful, slow task, but she did not give up, her gaze fixed on the goal. When the last ray of sun disappeared behind the horizon, Emma, wounded, tired, but unbroken, finished collecting the tobacco. She bandaged Melody's injured leg with her neckerchief, and then, with great difficulty, climbed into the saddle. Her own arm hurt unbearably, but she was ready to continue her journey. They moved forward, slowly, cautiously, making their way through the gathering darkness. Every rustle, every crack of a branch made her flinch, but she kept moving, her motivation unwavering. to deliver the tobacco and find a lawyer. 2 days later, exhausted but determined, Emma reached a small, dusty town called Silverwood. Her appearance, a wounded arm and a tired horse, attracted attention, but Emma ignored the curious glances. She found the office of the lawyer, Jonathan Reed, an old friend of Jack's. Reed, a sturdy man with thick eyebrows and a sharp gaze, was shocked to see her. "Emma Wilde," he said, his voice full of surprise. "Jack warned that you might come, but in this state." Emma briefly explained the situation, her voice hoarse but firm. She told him about the Boers, about Blackwood, about Jack who had stayed on the plantation. She laid the bags of tobacco on the table, her only evidence and means of livelihood. Reed listened carefully to her, his face growing more serious. "Blackwood. I've been fighting him for a long time. He's a real parasite. But you have all the evidence. And you, Miss Wilde, you are a strong woman. You will win." His words were filled with inspiration. He saw in her not just a victim, but a fighter. Jonathan Reed wasted no time. He immediately began preparing a lawsuit against Silas Blackwood, gathering testimonies, studying land documents. Emma, recovering from her injuries, helped him, explaining the intricacies of her case. They worked day and night, preparing for the trial, which was to take place in a few weeks in the Prescott County Court. On the appointed day, Emma and Reed arrived in Prescott. The town buzzed with rumors. The trial against Silas Blackwood was an unprecedented event. A crowd gathered in the courtroom, many of whom came to see the foolish girl lose to the powerful Blackwood. Blackwood himself, a corpulent, arrogant man with cold eyes, sat at the defense table, his gaze full of contempt for Emma. The court session began. Reed presented Emma's evidence, old land documents, testimonies from neighbors confirming her ownership, and even the dried tobacco leaves, as evidence of her labor and Blackwood's threat. He eloquently argued that Blackwood had violated the law by attempting to seize another's property by force. Blackwood's lawyer, on the other hand, tried to portray Emma as a lonely, defenseless woman who was incapable of managing a plantation, and that Blackwood, a good neighbor, was simply trying to help her. He even brought in Henry Fitzgerald, who, trembling with fear, confirmed that Wilde's land had always been problematic. But then Reed called Jack Turner as a witness. Jack, appearing in the courtroom, was calm and confident. He told about the Boer attack, how he saved Emma, about the visit of Blackwood's thugs and their threats. His words, backed by his authority and honesty, sounded like a clap of thunder in a clear sky. "I myself saw Boch threaten Miss Wilde," Jack stated firmly, "and I myself saw Blackwood's markers on her land. He tried to force her to leave, and he wanted her harvest to rot." A flicker of surprise, then anger, crossed Blackwood's face. He had not expected Jack to testify against him. After long deliberations, the judge, an elderly, gray-haired man who had listened carefully to all sides, finally delivered his verdict. He found Silas Blackwood guilty of illegal encroachment on property and attempted extortion. Blackwood was sentenced to pay a large fine and compensation to Emma, as well as to make a public apology. His lands, illegally seized from other farmers, were subject to review. The courtroom erupted in jubilation. Emma, standing beside Jack and Reed, felt her heart fill with pure triumph. Justice had prevailed. She had won. She had kept her father's land. She looked at Jack, his eyes full of pride. This was their shared victory. Returning to the plantation, Emma and Jack found that residents of neighboring farms had come to help them. They brought new seedlings, offered their help in restoring the fence, and shared food. Silas Blackwood was disgraced and broken. His empire was crumbling. The Wild West, it seemed, had changed a little, becoming a slightly more just place. One evening, as Emma and Jack sat by the campfire, watching the sunset, Emma turned to him. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her voice full of sincere gratitude. You're my guardian angel. You saved me and my land." Jack took her hand. "We're together, Emma. We did it. And this is just the beginning." He looked at her plantation, at the new seedlings, at the sturdy fence. "This is your home, and it's safe." And at that moment, looking at Jack, at his kind smile, Emma understood that her life had changed forever. She had gained not only land, but also a partner, a protector, a friend, a man who believed in her, who fought for her. And this was true inspiration. She, a girl who fled from wild boars, found the strength to fight a much more dangerous predator, and emerged victorious from that battle. Her heart, once full of pain and fear, was now filled with love, gratitude, and hope for a bright future. Conclusion and lesson for our viewers. Our dear grandmothers and grandfathers, the story of Emma Wilde and Jack Turner is not just a thrilling tale of the Wild West. It is a powerful reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, when injustice seems unconquerable, there is always room for hope, determination, and, most importantly, for human kindness. Emma, faced with the threat of losing everything she had, could have given up. She could have succumbed to despair when wild boars destroyed her harvest and Silas Blackwood tried to take her land. But she did not give up. Her inner strength, her faith in herself and in justice, allowed her to fight. And it was this struggle that drew Jack to her side, who became her support and protector. In our modern world, we often encounter our own wild boars and Silas Blackwoods. These can be unfair circumstances, bureaucratic red tape, or simply people who try to take advantage of our vulnerability. This story teaches us that even one person, armed with determination and supported by a loyal friend, can stand up to the system. Remember not to give up in the face of injustice. Your resilience, your belief in truth, can inspire others and lead to unexpected victories. Don't be afraid to seek support, and don't forget to lend a helping hand to those who need it. It is in such seemingly small acts of courage and compassion that true strength is born, capable of changing the world. Sometimes the hardest blow must be taken, but the most important thing is to find the strength to get up and keep fighting. Emma's story shows that even alone, with injuries and in the face of despair, triumph can be found when there is a clear goal and unwavering faith. And when someone is there to share that battle, then inspiration becomes endless.